Hello, my pretties, and welcome to Serial Killers Unfiltered with Pretty Jazz. This is Series 1, Episode 2, John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. Stay tuned.
If you want to say I slept in the same house with a dead body, okay, fine, I'll buy that. But in the same room, no. And besides, the dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Hey, let's jump on in. John Wayne Gacy, born March 17th, 1942, he was an American serial killer, a SO who RA'd, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Norwood Park Township near Chicago, Illinois. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. John Wayne Gacy, born March 17th, 1942, he was an American serial killer, ASO, who RA'd, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys in Norwood Park Township near Chicago, Illinois. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. Gacy's father frequently belittled his son. He would call him dumb and stupid and compare him unfavorably with his sisters. Gacy's earliest childhood memory was of his father beating him with a leather belt at age 4. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's abuse. That resulted in accusations that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who would probably grow up to be a queer. In 1949, Gacy's father whipped him with a razor after he and another boy were caught essaying a young girl. The same year, a family friend began to occasionally molest Gacy. Gacy never told his father, afraid that his father would blame him. Gacy loved his father, but he just felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. Gacy was an unathletic child and overweight. Gacy had a heart condition and was told to avoid sports. Gacy began to experience blackouts while only in the 4th grade. He was hospitalized on occasion because of these episodes. Also, in 1957, his appendix busted. Later, Gacy estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he had spent almost a year in the hospital. Gacy's medical condition, however, was never conclusively diagnosed. Gacy's father believed he wasn't in any pain. On one occasion, he openly accused Gacy of lying and faking while he was laying in a hospital bed. Gacy committed all of his murders in his ranch-style house. He would lure a victim to his home and then dupe them into putting on handcuffs on the pretext of him demonstrating a magic trick to them. He would then RA them and torture his victims before killing them by either strangling them with a garrote or asphyxiation. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space of his home, and 3 were buried elsewhere on the property.
I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale.
4 were discarded in the Des Plaines River. Gacy had previously been convicted and sentenced to 10 years in 1968 for the essay of a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa, but he only served 18 months. He murdered his first victim in 1972, had murdered twice more by the end of 1975, and murdered at least 30 victims after his divorce from his second wife in 1976. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Peast led to Gacy's arrest on December 21st, 1978. His conviction for 33 murders by one individual, then at the time covered the most homicides in the United States legal history.
Victims, I've looked at all of, I don't know if you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here. And believe it or not, for the last 12 years, I've studied these photos of the victims. And there is no, we have a shot of all of the victims together here. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them, never met them. And we've gone over this more than once. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them, the thing of it is, we took it a step further. We went into their backgrounds. I wanted to know where they were at, what schools they attended, who they hung out with, and what kind of activities they were into. And that's what we dug up on each one of the victims. But still, there is no association. None of them never worked for me. None of them, they never went to any places that I ever hung around, because I didn't hang around that many places unless you were involved in politics, or if you were involved in clowning, then I might have ran into you. But there's
Gacy is thought to have killed 33 people over a 6-year period. He claims his first victim in 1972, Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old boy who he had stabbed to death after picking him up from a bus terminal. He would then bury many of his victims under his house. The remains were only recently identified thanks to the DNA technology that unfortunately wasn't available back then.
They've created this fantasy monster image, and it's been going on for the last 12 years. And I've ever had no comment, and I had no need to talk to the media, for the simple reason that they were looking for sensationalism and they were looking for the monster.
When you say fantasy monster image, what are you referring to by that?
Well, the idea that I'm a homosexual thrill killer and all that garbage, and they painted this image of me that like I strolled down the streets and stalked young boys and slaughtered them. The clowning was relaxation for me. I enjoyed entertaining kids. Clowning has taken a bad name because of what they've used in my case. My dad came from the old country. When he drank, he was almost like a different person. My dad struck all of us children all the time. And I don't deny that I've engaged in sex with males, but that I'm bisexual.
You're bisexual?
Right. My preference is women. Insofar as being bisexual, if I wanted to engage in sex, Rossi and Cram were willing to go down on me anytime I wanted to. My marriages went down the drain only because I was a workaholic. To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies were found on the property. 27 of them under the house.
And the rest?
One was under the driveway, one was under the garage. So that makes a total of 29.
After securing a search warrant to Gacy's home, police discovered the bodies of 29 boys and young men, while 4 other bodies were discovered in Des Plaines River. The smell of the bodies had been building up for years, but Gacy dismissed the questions by saying it was just a buildup of damp. At his trial, Gacy's plea of innocent by reason of insanity was supported by the testimony of several psychologists who had diagnosed him as a schizophrenic, but was rejected by the jury, which found him guilty of all 33 murders which he was accused. John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980. John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection in 1994. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Serial Killers Unfiltered with Pretty Jazz Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to episode 2. Stay tuned. Bye.